Matt, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since appearing on yours and thankfully making your acquaintance since, I'm very intrigued to see where this conversation goes today.
I also am intrigued to see where this conversation goes, and I'm hoping you can answer my question of what a good life is within the next, hour or so? That's a tall order, my
Absolutely.
friend.
No problem at all, Matt. So, Matt, as you are aware, I kicked this off with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
So I'm excited to give this to you because I'm excited on the back and forth that we're going to go based on prior conversations with this. I seem to be of the realization that the thing I keep returning back to in like 8 different layers is that we've got this connectivity crisis, whatever you want to call it, that's going on in the world right now. And I kind of feel like it's been wrapped up in my entire life. I feel like this whole, we feel disconnected, we feel lonely, we feel weird about things. This has been haunting me my entire existence. And it just keeps spinning up and spinning up further and spinning up further. And I'm finally here at age of 44 with a little shred of wisdom, but not much yet. And hopefully a lot of life in front of me. I can look back and go, this disconnection thing has showed up in 3 places over and over again. And I've just been fighting it since I've been old enough to fight. And I feel like it shows up at home, like in our immediate nuclear family lives. I feel like it shows up in work and the things that we do, and we exchange our time for money or resources or whatever it is. And it shows up in community. And I'll use community to be as broadly as anytime we show up and it's not work outside of our family, whether that's at a baseball game or at church or at, some other random event, you're hanging out with friends at the bar. I think that disconnection is something that we're all feeling extra in the world today. I have theories on why, but I feel like everything I do is trying to help solve that problem for myself and to help other people solve it. What do you think of that? Is that big enough for you?
Yeah, I love it. From your perspective, though, when would you say you even became aware of this?
All right, we're gonna couch this in there's this weird thing. And I'm going to trace it back to something that I've heard mostly from comedians, but I think this is really relevant to anybody who has any type of performance background. So I've been playing music and wanting to be in front of people performing my entire life. I've got a picture that's like my Twitter banner of me with a toy guitar and a group of my aunts and uncles at basically like some type of party in my grandparents' basement as a child. And I'm just fascinated by this thing. And I'm fascinated by it because the person entertaining, and the comedians will say this too, it's how you immediately bring peace to a room. Like the room gets quiet. It's not so much about just getting eyes on you. There's a little bit of hamming it up that goes in there, but it's the idea that somebody can take any stress, noise, chaos, and like bring everybody together for a moment. And that's a superpower. And I feel like I noticed that superpower as a child when my aunts and uncles would take the guitars out and all of a sudden like the family event would get really fun and exciting. And I've been chasing that my life up into this point, which is what are ways that we can jump into the middle of the fray and go, I've got this. Let's bring this all together. Kind of as long as I can remember.
But that's a beautiful sentiment, though, of almost like a collective point of attention.
Yeah.
From your perspective, just I'd love to know how you came to it having these 3 particular layers.
I think I can't remember. Edgar Schein. Did you ever run into any of like Edgar Schein's work or whatever? Edgar Schein and his brother, and I always forget the names and switch them up. Another great book called Helping. He wrote the technical book on culture, and I won't break down the crazy definitions, but it's really interesting. And it's really interesting if you like studying things like culture, which I've been drawn to. There's a reason all the branding stuff is cultish creative. And it's this fascination with groups and collectivism that candidly came into my head without me thinking of it this way. But in some bizarro inception thing, I'm repackaging to understand it this way. So the 3 layers in culture, and I think of it like this because when you look, you have to look at groups where both you are doing something and you are making something. And there's a togetherness in both of those things. It's not just doing something in isolation. There's somebody else involved in some way. And there's making something, and that could be making an artifact. We could be making a piece of art. We could be recording a podcast. Or we could just be making an experience. It doesn't have to be you come over and we do a Build-A-Bear workshop together. It might just be we hang out and have a good laugh. And that experience is the same as an artifact to me. And so when I sort of look back and I think about foundational and formational parts of my life, and I think about different places where there's culture and there's that collectivism, as you so eloquently put it, I think about my life with my family growing up, my life with my family now. I think about work and the way our working identities shift and evolve and develop over time, where we try to exchange our time and energies for resources, whatever they may be. And I think about the non-work, non-family, the third spaces, and all the friendships, all the disappointments, all the frustrations, all the teams that win the tournament or win the pennant or win the series, and all the reasons that like our heart gets broken, or we go like, oh, I used to really love going to that place and now I don't love going there anymore. And I see those layers as distinct. I see them as encompassing. And at least as of this conversation, maybe I'll have a elevation today, I can't think of anything that doesn't fit into one of those three categories, but I see a unique culture in each one of those. What are you thinking?
What are you thinking? I just I'm really fascinated with how you perceive or might feel a sense of disconnection across any of those layers.
Okay. This is why I'm talking to you. I'm basically here for therapy. So that's my expectation of every time we get on a call together. So of course this should be recorded so we can capture this therapy for the world. So I can give examples of each of these things. Like I've felt, and let's do the hard one first. Let's like family is tricky. Like family is messy. And I had this thing growing up where I wanted to get out and away from my family, not because there was a bad situation or anything else going on, but like I was like, I have to get out of this place that I grew up in. Like I have to get away, like not totally away from these people. I want to still be related to them, but I have to get away from all this stuff and I have to find my way in the world alone. And that was a proactive case of disconnection. That's like unplugging yourself from the comfort, from the safety, from the group, because you wanted the self-discovery aspect comes in. It took a while. Like it took adult life. It took going through a bunch of other things and trying to figure out family, a bunch of failed relationships, a bunch of other just messy things you figure out from your, in my case, my 20s into my 30s before I went, I get what I'm missing here. And like the end result of that, the end result of like all these things like culminates in me re-meeting my wife, really, because we had met a long, long time ago. That's a fun story too. But re-meeting my wife and going, this is what I'm missing in the family aspect. This is what I haven't found. I haven't found the support. I haven't found this mode of reconnection yet in my adult life in a way that completed me in all these different ways. Not to put the onus on her, but put the onus back on what we do and what we make together is a uniquely special thing. So the disconnection, which is part on my own half, but then the inability to find that connection was a huge part of my family life. And I can honestly say from my early 20s into my mid to late 30s that I really struggled with. And it was an act of rediscovering sort of what that value set, alignment, and orientation was towards bridging that gyre.
As you're speaking there, as just I'm thinking as well, even just some of the terms you used around like even loneliness, just different elements of what we might consider disconnection, just how they almost seem to be inbuilt into the experience as well,
Oh,
right? Like the idea of at some point you're going to go away. Like I remember saying to my wife when we arrived in Berlin, like I feel a little bit lonely now, even though I'd met several people, but I didn't have people that I knew for years, and just that kind of comfort that comes with it. And there's nothing that can be done with that. It's part of the experience. Just wondering, was there? aside from what you described there and what you discovered with meeting your wife, has something brought peace to that experience of seeking something or wanting something from those relationships?
So the peace comes, I think, this is not to tread on your sacred last question, but it moves in the direction of this, is realizing I needed to actually think about all three of those areas: the home aspect, the work aspect, and the community aspect. And I needed to think about what feels right about those cultures and those domains, because that's where you spend all of your time. Outside of the time in your own head, as soon as you are doing things in the world with others, you are working inside of those three cultures, and they switch and they swap out and whatever else. But I had to realize that I had to put those things together. So I feel like this is appropriate to repeat at least one, if not two, stories inside of here that I think I've shared with you personally, but certainly not in this format. The first is I was seeing a therapist in my mid-30s. It was a long stretch of seeing this therapist, and I was feeling very disconnected and lonely at this point. It was especially as we were coming like into the pandemic and all that stuff started to unfold. Luckily, I was already in this mode of care, but I had this moment where I felt disconnected totally disconnected from any like personal relationships where I was there. I felt disconnected at work, and like the friend group almost didn't exist at that point. It felt like I had acquaintances. I had people I called friends, but they weren't there. And I'm sitting in the therapist's office. And I'm talking to the therapist. The therapist is like, "Who else are you talking to about this?" And I'm like, "Lady, I'm talking to you about this. That's why I hired you. That's why you're getting paid. What even is that question?" And she's like, "Matt, this isn't how this works. This is not how this works. Like, you need to talk and open up and share with other people." And I know it's dumb that was a lightning bolt, but that was a lightning bolt to me to be like, okay, I guess you're right. I guess I can't just pay somebody else for the service of being my friend, my acquaintance, my person I share things with. I actually have to cultivate this in relationships, in cultures. There's a reason those prefixes are all the same across these different domains. And that really set me in motion from kind of like my mid 30s to today. So telling a therapist that I'm paying you to be the only person I need to talk to, one big milestone revelation moment for me. The other one, and this is the how I met my wife story, which I think is just really great. So we met 25 years ago on her 16th birthday. And then we didn't talk for, you know, almost 2 decades. But we met because a relative of hers, it's actually her aunt, who's her youngest aunt, but I thought they were cousins at the time. But that's the life when you're a couple of years apart in grade school in the same area. We grew up in the same area. My band, my high school band, gets invited to play a Sweet 16 birthday party. And we say yes, because a friend, like a cool older friend, goes, "My kid cousin is having her Sweet 16 birthday. She likes your band. Will you play at this party?" And we say yes, and we play at this party. And a funny thing happens at this party. We play, and we were a much more approachable type of music, for lack of a better word, than some of the other like more punky, hardcore-ish bands that were playing. And so after we play our set in the middle of the show, some of the adults come over and they're like, "This is really cool. 8-piece band, horn section, the whole thing, like dancey fun." And they're like, "This is really cool. You guys are doing something special. You should keep this up." And we have that conversation, proceed to say thank you to the family and the people throwing the party and whatever else, and then not talk again. And so flash forward to 5-6 years ago, I'm hanging out with one of my buddies from that band, and he brings up, he's like, "Remember that time, when we were 18 years old and we played that party and all those adults in that room were like, you're actually doing something cool. Remember, like now we're, coming up on 40 and we're reflecting on like, they were probably our age and how they made us feel." And we're having this moment talking about it. And I'm like, you know what? I have this person Facebook keeps recommending me. This person, and I can't figure out why. Like we know 30 of the same people, but I can't figure out why I know this person. I'm like, this is the girl that we played at that party. This was her party. And so I send her the request. She immediately sends a message back. She's like, "Did you know you played at my 16th birthday party?" I'm like, "I just figured it out." And that starts a conversation, and she becomes my wife. And furthermore, so we have this special connection that turns into our family. But then furthermore, on top of that, we start to realize we both left. We did the same thing. We like ran from this area. We ran from our families kind of as fast as we could. And we both started going like, maybe we should be back there. Like, why are we living in Chicago and living in New England and living in these places where it's like, what are we actually tied to here? I'm going, I just told my therapist that I don't have anybody to talk to. And I'm slowly piecing this back together. You're right. What are we doing here? And it started to call into questions about who are the people we're spending the most time with. And outside of a small group of very close friends I had cultivated at that point, the same for her, we started to go like, do we just move back to our hometown now? Like, do we just do this to be around, what the family that we still have here, and then also some friends and relationships? And I can tell you, being able to work remotely was a huge enabler of this for me. She does nursing work, so she can do lots of different stuff. But we came back with this attitude of like, we have our family core now together. We have each other, we have our family. But then on top of that, it was, how do we layer in the work relationships that we both have, different but combined? And then how do we layer in the communal aspects of like, we're not coming back here to go to church. We are coming back here to be at a New Year's Eve party with a bunch of our friends, people like we've known. We have 30 years of history separately with like the same groups of people. We have all these overlapping friend groups. It's actually kind of insane that we weren't in more rooms at the same time together 25 years ago. But it's the bridging of this where I go, I have connection in all these places that is both forming and deepening. And I need to not screw that up. I need to keep pressing this because the rewards of that experience are the only ways to not feel the lonely, to not feel the empty, emotionless, like void state of the doom scroll, to not feel. And I'm thinking of that widening gyre thing comes from the Yeats poem, and Yeats says the line like, where the falconer no longer sees the falconer or whatever it is. And it's like, oh my God, that still gives me shivers when I say it. But that's the disconnection. And it shows up at those three levels. And I feel like I've had to learn to personally seek out those three categories and invest time, energy, and spirituality into all three of them.
So many directions to go in here, Matt. But I do want to ask you about what was that realization like in the therapist, with the therapist, around I'm paying this person because this is the person that I want to hear, the only person that I'm telling this stuff to.
So the realization was, I didn't have anybody in a family situation I could go to talk about, to actually open up. I was scared to tell friends in the community space. I was scared to tell acquaintances or friends what I had going on inside me and what I was feeling and thinking, because I was like, it just felt like too much. It's like, this is too much for me to talk to other people. Like, listen, I will throw all the problems on my back. I will carry it just fine. I don't, this is something I was raised upon, which is some of that Protestant work ethic meets a good sense of almost Midwestern values, even though we're not Midwestern, where it's like, no, thank you. Like, I've got all my problems. You don't need to know any of them. And then same at work. Like, I was completely unfulfilled in the work setting that I was at. So forget trying to move the needle or change anything there, because I was so invested in trying to lead with that first. Probably a lot of people can relate to this. In my 20s, especially into my early 30s, everything was like just proving yourself to the world in some way, shape, or form. So it's like, I'm trying to climb this ladder. I'm trying to figure this thing out that I feel like everybody else has figured out except me. So who am I supposed to reach out to that's actually going to help me here, when the people I do reach out to doesn't seem like it ends up working out the way it's supposed to? And so in the therapist's seat, I feel like all three of those things came crashing down on the idea of, if you're scared to share this with anybody else, like, you're never going to get over this chasm. You're never going to cross this gap unless you're willing to start building this bridge on the way out. And I left that session, and within the next week or so, I had opened up to at least, but in my mind, 3 different people where I was like, listen, we talk a lot. I need to actually tell you some of the stuff that's going on in my head. And each of those people that I started to open up a little bit to, like they had said something that made it feel like it was safe for me to start to cross that bridge. Each of them came back with a, you know what, in their own way, a, you know what, me too. And those very small handful of relationships blossomed into a handful more, not a lot more, but a handful more, where all of a sudden I realized I wasn't the only person going through some crap. And that was the push over the edge that changed my personal situation. It changed my work situation, and it changed the people that I was keeping around me in community, because it brought a whole new sense of community back into my life.
God, this resonates on so many levels, and in terms of, I can even remember being in the first therapy session I had in my early 30s, and the poor woman asking me how did I feel, and I gave her three psychological theories in response to three attempts to ask me the question.
When
But
you did you
also
go through
even
that? Where in the world were you when you went through that experience?
I was in London at the time.
Okay. So this is already like you're away from home, you're in that next phase of life, and you're also feeling this disconnect, even though you're a bit more self-diagnosed. I also went in with a bunch of like, here's my research theories on like what's wrong.
Yeah, like I wanted to know how long it would last, or how many sessions exactly it would take, this kind of thing. But no, I was, although I'm sure I would have had some conversations of depth with people, just wasn't connected to how I felt whatsoever. And there is also a really, I see this a lot where I almost noticed myself holding on to stories to tell my therapist specifically, almost like so I'd have the goods. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to tell anyone about this right now because this will be a really great story. And then realizing when I arrived in the room and the energy had left me that, oh yeah, this is nothing to share right now.
This is crap. It's funny. Something that I would think of all the time is, did you play a musical instrument or anything growing up? Did you ever go through childhood music
Not
lessons? Okay.
like some stuff, but nothing seriously.
So this is a weird thing that I would think about all the time in the therapist's couch, which was this like music lesson thing of where, you're practicing, you go home, you work on the thing, you come back once a week, and like therapy had a very similar cadence and feel to that experience, just without some of the bizarreness. And I've got some great stories about that too. But the idea of like storing stuff up over the week. And I'm like, what is that? Like, why is this entering my brain? And then it's like that thing where you get into the setting and you go, oh, like, I'll label it. Like, that's a stupid thing. I can't believe I was
Yeah.
holding on to this in my back pocket for a week, because now it feels really dumb or really immature or just really just like, who cares? Who cares out there?
What was that like though, in terms of, you mentioned just opening up to potentially three people initially? Can you put yourself back in those shoes and just describe maybe what that experience was?
The experience unilaterally was like, I realized there was I don't want to make this sound transactional, but there was a give and take nature of each of these, where somebody opened up a little bit, like they opened the door slightly. And I was like, I'm going to take this slight invitation, which was clearly them testing the waters with me. Like, this is being an adult. Like, you have to, I mean, it's being a kid too. This is how you sit next to your buddy, like in the cafeteria for the first time. But it's like, what's the door that's just opened a sliver so that they go, you probably don't know this about me, but this. And then you go, oh, you probably don't know this about me, but this too. And I can understand it now. I'm going to go back to this idea from before of, this is the what we do and what do we make together. Because what we're making there is we're making this bridge, this trust, this friendship with each other, of saying like, here's a little piece of me, here's a little piece of you, here's another piece of me, here's another piece of you, and we're going to keep on going with that until these things start to connect. And when they start to connect, then we start to build over them. We start to pave over them. We start to construct something where we have this bridge where we can go back and forth to each other and where time can pass, but the structure still stands. Where I don't necessarily talk to all three of those people constantly anymore. I talked to some of them in that group, and I could go back probably in my mind if I mapped it out to the people I started talking to in the wake of that therapy conversation. And I can say, like, with great authority, those are in my Dunbar's 15 or whatever you call those people. Like, they're all still there in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's not daily or weekly or monthly contact, you give me 5 minutes with any of those people and we will slot right back into, oh, that bridge is built and fortified.
When did you recognize that? Because I think there's something quite substantial to that.
I think you recognize that over time. And I think that's how I recognized it, was this is not going to be a temporary state. Like, the things we're going through and the things we're experiencing and sharing, those have a temporal quality to them. That this too shall pass thing is real. And we're probably not going to be here forever because we don't want to be here forever. Like, this part sucks. We want to get out of this part. And, you know, you start to realize other things that you love. Back to the thing, like, how far back does this go? You start thinking about things you've been obsessed with and you're like, holy crap, have I been obsessed with this my entire life? Because this is exactly wrestling with the same problem in some weird incepted divine way. And that moment of understanding the story of the bridge was going to pass beyond the story of the experience, and that was going to turn into that relationship. I think certainly within a year or two, that felt really strong. Within 3 or 4 or 5 years out, like, that just feels the proverbial ride or die-ness of it. It's like, any of those people call me for something, I'm stopping what I'm doing to answer the phone. And it's almost like there's no question they can't ask, or it's just like, all right, what do I do? How do I help you? Like, you're there for me, I'm there for you. And that's the unspoken pact that we don't need to speak because it's there. But I feel it all the way through. You ever seen the movie Cool Hand Luke? Do you know this movie? I feel inclined to tell you this
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Okay. You've seen the movie, you've probably not read the book, but you're familiar with this loosely in your brain. This was a movie that was always on in the US. It was like TMC or AMC or whatever. It'd be on at like 4:00 in the morning. And this is an important detail. So I'm in high school, or I'm like high school aged, and I'm playing in bands with all older guys. So we're playing in bars and places like that. I was frequently getting home at like 3:00 in the morning at like the age of, 15 through 18. And then beyond that too, but I had less cable after I left my parents' house, and I couldn't watch things like Cool Hand Luke at 4 in the morning on AMC. So I would come home at like 3:30 in the morning, and I would have to do like the come down off of whatever I was doing so that I could finally sleep. And that movie would be on. And do you remember the plot of this movie at all? Did this movie have any lasting impact on you whatsoever?
Not really, no.
Most people just remember him eating the eggs. And they're like,
Okay.
that movie? He eats all the eggs and he doesn't puke, and they bet on it? You're like, yeah, it's a great scene. And it's true, he didn't puke. What that movie's about is it's about this character, Paul Newman plays him. Fantastic book too, for anybody who cares enough to read books anymore. But the idea is basically he goes to work in the military. He goes as a soldier. He basically realizes that the military is not a life for him. He gets arrested at the beginning of the movie because he's drunk on a street corner, and he's literally with like a giant set of like cutter things, like chopping the heads off of parking meters as like an act of defiance and anarchy against the state or something. And the cops come and get him. And they're like, what is this drunk guy doing here? And they throw him in jail. And the premise of the movie, the arc of the character that we track Luke through, is that you will build a prison for yourself in your mind, and you will find prisons to put yourself in the world. And in this case, the movie explores the prison that Luke's made for himself in his own mind, like the mentality he can't get out of in society and culture and in his existence, and this physical prison that he's been placed in for the duration of the movie, where he has to go work on the chain gang and do everything else. And sort of like the liberating moment in the movie is he gives up fighting with God over this. Like there's this crazy scene where he's in the church and he dies in the end of the movie. And the whole idea is just like, you gotta give up making this a fight and give up putting yourself in these prisons to get out of it. And the movie ends with the story of Luke being told by the other prisoners. And it's like, it's almost like a Jesus story type thing where it's like the story of salvation, the story of somebody who was like freed of the bonds of both the prison and of his mind. And that's the way we have to think about it. So I watched this movie like a million times in my foundational years. And I found myself in my mid to late 30s again, obsessing over this idea of you will make prisons in your mind and you will put yourself in that prison. You will find prisons and jobs and careers and arcs, and you will put yourself in that prison if you cannot imagine a life uh, without either of those prisons looking over you and keeping you to their order, their design, and their structure. And until you start letting go of those things, which requires not a relationship with, I mean, maybe a relationship with the man upstairs if that's your thing, but if not, a relationship with the fellow people that you will make and do stuff with so that it's not an imprisoning act. And that was a profound transformation that I started to feel of going, why would I opt in to be a part of this other thing if it's not giving me those bridges and that connection? And likewise, why would I opt into a relationship if it's not giving me these bridges, that connection, that feeling of like, this isn't a prison. I can go and come freely as I please and find my own peace in this experience. Did you expect to get into Cool Hand Luke? Was that on your bingo card for this conversation? I'm surprised
Of
you brought it
course.
out of me. Of course you did.
But it is a beautiful concept, though, or idea of just no longer fighting with God, with life, with some sort of self-imposed prison. What was it? Work was the thing that came to mind for you when you were talking about that initially, or where was that most prevalent in this kind of transition for you?
Yeah, I think it's work. It was very apparent for me. And then also it's the rules and structuring of these different ideas. And what's interesting in this is cool. This is why we're talking. So you could make me reflect on the Cool Hand Luke story and where these things showed up. Because I hadn't actually thought about it in this way until right now, which I'm loving this. So it's interesting. We actually get some in the movie. There's some family members who come to visit, and you get the sense of the family dynamic and how that's also kind of a prison to Luke. And then you have his friends in the community that are his fellow prisoners and are rooting for him the couple of times he escapes the prison and whatever else. And then you have the literal chain gang work structure that he's in. And right up to the fight, kind of like with God in the church when God doesn't respond and he realizes just like he's letting go of all these structures and all these arguments. For work with me, it was so I was playing music and playing in bands and doing stuff like that. I was completely entrepreneurial, never really had a real job except for some time in construction for half a summer or whatever growing up. I didn't really have a real job or any of those experiences until I was already well into my 20s. And when I started to do that in my, early to mid 20s there, that whole dynamic of like, oh my God, this is like school all over again, where there are rules and bosses and like this person has authority and this person doesn't, and how to play by this. And I felt like everybody else had this thing figured out. Like they had that prison structure like mapped out so they wouldn't, get shanked in the mess hall or whatever. Like they had that figured out and I didn't. And I was like, oh, I am way behind. I got to figure out how to catch up. I better shut up and fall in line. And if somebody else says, hold my pocket, I'm going to hold their pocket and we're going to get through this thing together. And that led to mentorships that weren't really mentorships. That led to here's the way you succeed. And you go, well, that was the way maybe you succeeded 25 years ago. It's got nothing to do with me, but it sucks so much time and life and energy. And then the consistent feeling like you're failing inside the system, but you can't leave that system because you got bills to pay and you got a life. And this seems like the way everybody else, is doing it. And realizing like, that's the trap that I'm laying for myself. That was a huge one in work for me, and slowly starting to realize what structures I wanted to have in my relationship with what I was exchanging in my time for money that I had to go back and revisit. You went through a version of this too, right? This is you waking up and going, the body scan story, right? That's where my brain goes with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you can relate to this awakening with your relationship to work.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued though from your perspective with it though, the ways in which relationship played such a key part in it, because one thing I'm fascinated about when I look back on my work, one of the happier times I had even working for someone else was when I was something like 23 in corporate banking, and we were invested in all this lovely credit default swap and whatever, all the lovely stuff that took down economies essentially. And yet I still enjoyed I was working with there was a group of young people on the team that I really enjoyed their company. Like they were just really really good to be around. And so I'm always intrigued when people talk about, you know, purpose and you must find this and that. I'm just really intrigued from your perspective, just the significance of, perhaps as you're alluding to, maybe deeper relationships within a work context, and what shifted from what sounded like, maybe more transactional ways of mentorship, or different ideas of transfer of information, and how that unfolded for you.
So a couple of big things happened, I think, for me regarding work. And the biggest of which was I was working for this giant company, this giant financial institutional type company. And they used to always come back to one of the founders' stories. And it was this quote that got thrown around constantly. And it was, the interest of our customers must come first. And it was one of those things that, like, you trot it out and it sounds good. And you're like, I get it. Corporate marketing speak. I'm going to kind of ignore this thing. But all right, there's two layers of this story that are amusing, I think. So the first layer is, and this is an important detail about me, I went to, and I have nothing but good feelings and stories and whatever else. I went to this, it was a church camp that I went to. We grew up in this weird in between Protestant and Methodist combo church that they rebuilt after a flood in the 70s. And I grew up going to this church. And it was really a communal aspect for my parents after they both relocated from towns where they grew up to a new area for work and then had a young family. And so they joined a church as a way of finding community in a new place in the 80s here in Pennsylvania when they relocated. And that was a big part of the purpose that church served in our lives, was whatever you decide you're going to think about God is fine. We're here because this is a community of good people. And it was. Because of that church, I go to this summer camp every single year from like third grade up until sometime in high school when I start working at the camp off and on, helping out with stuff like that. I'm in like somewhere in elementary school, maybe not third grade, but can't be more than like fifth grade. And because it's a church themed camp, we have this time where we're supposed to just like be hanging out in the bunks and being quiet. It's not nap time, but it's like, elementary school nap time, where it's like just quiet time for half an hour or something like that. Maybe it was like 15 minutes and it felt like an hour. But either way, I'm a bored, curious kid. And I was a big reader and stuff like that. I don't have any books. The only friggin' book in this place is a copy of the Bible. And so here I am, let's just assume I'm in fifth grade. I'm in fifth grade with a copy of the Bible, and I'm leafing through it. And I'm like, I know that story. I'm like, what happens to this Noah guy, like around the flood? And I'm like, holy crap. I'm going to like the counselor, going to somebody else, be like, did you know that after the flood, do you know what happens to Noah after the flood? You know what he does right after the flood? You remember this story? Noah gets tanked. Like, he drinks all the wine. He gets so wasted that he's blacked out drunk in his tent and nobody knows where Noah is. And they come and they find him, and his family like opens the tent and they find Noah lying stark naked. And he basically like almost brings shame upon the family. And I'm like, what purpose does this story serve? That we have to hear about Noah celebrating overcoming the flood, cocking a few too many back, and now bringing shame because they find him naked in the tent. Like, what is this doing in here? And then I start reading the Bible, looking for other stories like in this summer camp of like, I'm like, this person got killed with a stake through their temple. Like, where's the goodwill to man inside of this murder story? Because I just found a murder story in here. What's this all about? I want more about this story. And the people were like, let's not talk about that here. Let's not have this conversation at happy summer church camp. Just go home in a week and ask your parents about this if you must. But it incepted this idea. So now, flash forward, whatever, 20 plus years, I'm at work and they're like, the interest of our clients must come first. I'm like, all right, that's fine. So now I'm like, I'm looking around on the internet one day. I'm like, where's that quote actually like come from? And I started looking up stories about this guy. And I find the story about and this is Charlie Merrill, who founded Merrill Lynch, by the way. And so like, I find this story about like Charlie Merrill and like coming out of like the Great Depression. And it's like, we're coming out of the Great Depression and he's bringing Wall Street to Main Street. And this is where the interest of our clients must come first. And this whole thing of bucking institutional trends to sell to regular mom and pop people, the ultimate enterprise, like B2C maneuver. And he's writing this letter and he's like, this widow writes me and she's like, what do I do with my money? My husband left me a paltry pension and like a few dollars. I need to raise the family. What do I do? And he's like, you should buy these railroad stocks and these tobacco stocks and these utility companies. And that's how we take care of the widow and whatever else. I'm like, that's not the whole story. Like, no way that's the whole story. So now I start looking up the companies that he told the widow to buy. And I find out that the companies he told the widow to buy were all basically like offerings that his company was running and therefore like profiting off of the distribution. And since he couldn't get institutional people to buy in, he was finding like mom and pop Main Street. So this poor widow from like Kansas who writes him this letter ends up getting a bunch of product like jammed down her throat to help underwrite the bottom line of his company. And I'm like, the interest of the clients must come first. Do we know this story about this guy? Because he kind of sounds like a douchebag. And he kind of sounds like somebody who's just like figuring out how to profiteer off of Main Street and take this to the consumer first. And I don't know how great I feel about that, but they kept saying it. They kept saying to me, the interest of the customer must come first. And especially when you're in a publicly owned shareholder company, you start to go, don't you really mean the interest of the shareholders? Because it seems like a bunch of the things you're saying don't actually rhyme with how you're acting. And this goes back to that idea of what you do, what you make, and who you do it with. And I was like, I don't like what we're making. And I increasingly don't like, not everyone. There's a lot of people I love, and I have a lot of love for people inside of that company still. But there was definitely people where I was like, you got more of that Charlie Merrill thing going than you realize. There is a mercenary transactional thing here where you're going to say one thing and act in another way in a way that I don't think feels really good. And around the same time, I was starting to make friends like outside of the organization. I was trying to make friends with going like, what does it look like to hang your own shingle or join a smaller firm? And I ultimately decided I wanted to leave and join a smaller firm that could help me develop and grow in the next set of ways that I've been doing for the last 5 years now. But it was that idea of like, what you say and what you're making don't line up. And sometimes you just got to flee the prison. You got to break the prison. You got to run. And knowing when to quit, knowing when to get off, knowing when to shut that down matters. You asked about relationships. I'll tie this back into there first. I started a conversation with a friend of mine going, I know I can trust you to tell you. He was outside of my organization. I'm thinking about leaving. And I'm trying to figure out who else I should talk to. He opened up his proverbial Rolodex, Black Book, whatever dated reference you want to use. And he was like, I think you should talk to a friend. This guy, here's a friend. I think you should talk to him. That's still a friend to this day that he introduced me to when I was looking to explore that, who did something similar. We became friends going through all this stuff and making me see this was available. Same thing. I was trying to figure out how to structure part of the deal when I left so I would understand it. He was like, here's another person I think you should talk to. The person he refers me to another person. Next thing I know, I'm on the phone with this person. We had exchanged some emails back when. This guy was a well-respected published author and whatever else. He's driving his kids to the beach on the phone with me. Oh, don't worry. They're on their iPads. Let's talk through the legal agreement you're about to sign in detail. I've got an hour in the car. And all these little bridges to that outside world started to open up. And they're all relationship driven. They're all person driven. And they're all in alignment with seeking community, was seeking, giving something back, and not the transactional nature of how are we going to take this and jam it down somebody else's throat. And that was, for me, a big part of my realization that, like, oh, I really don't have to play that game. Those people have figured out something that works for them, theoretically. It just, no judgment, doesn't work for me. And I don't have to be there. And I've never been happier than making that decision to not be there anymore.
Can you give me a sense of contrasting experiences almost in terms of energy in the before and after of that transition?
So I'm studying because I think it's appropriate at the time to study for one of these fancy letters for after your name. Chartered financial analyst for anybody who cares, but it's notoriously hard test with a low pass rate and whatever else. I got through the first level. I was on the second level. I'm pulling my hair out. I'm like, this is just, I'm starting to question if it felt like it was the right thing for me to do on the corporate ladder path. And I started to realize this is not the, I was bad at math. I developed a solid math phobia by the fourth grade when a teacher with almost my same name basically convinced me that I was just bad at fractions and then decided she didn't like me because I made a snide comment about a Shirley Temple movie she was showing on a snow day. And I was like, all right, so I just don't really do math. So here I am as an adult trying to take this math heavy exam, and all the math phobia that's been in my brain since the fourth grade is like creeping back with a vengeance. And I'm trying to just force that round peg through the square hole on this thing. But in doing so, I get to this chapter and I'm looking at this chapter and I'm like, this behavioral psychology stuff in this literature is really, really interesting to me. Maybe I should be doing something more with that and something less with the actual how you calculate the decay on the the credit default swap, to borrow a term from your world. It was like really intense math, especially in level 2, around things like calculating the intrinsic value of this kind of stuff, and I was horrible at it. So I'm looking at this chapter. A headhunter calls me and she's like, there's this new company. They're hiring for this thing. And I'm like, I don't do this kind of work. Why are you even calling me? Are you the worst? I didn't say, are you the worst headhunter ever? But I'm kind of berating the person and like, how did you even make the mistake to call for me? Who is this new company? And well, founder of this company is this guy, Michael Pompian. And I don't know. I'm just really trying to help because this is a really hard role for me to figure out how to fill. And I'm like, wait a second. I know that name. And I pull out my study materials. And in the book, I've opened up to the behavioral psychology thing, and I'm like, oh, Michael Pompian's the name at the bottom of this. Like, he wrote this chapter. So I tell the headhunter, on second thought, can I have that? Can you set up that call? And they're surprised and they're like, yeah, sure. So they set up the call. I get on. I'm like, the headhunter's not supposed to tell me who you were, but they said who you were. You're Michael Pompian. You wrote the behavioral psychology stuff in the behavioral finance section of the CFA curriculum. I just wanted to meet you. I'm not the person you should hire for this job, but I have questions. If I'm not going to go this path, what is this? And that starts a friendship. Michael Pompian's the founder of Sunpointe, the firm where I currently work. Like, this is how this evolves. At the old job, they wanted the letters after my name. They wanted me to pursue this stuff just so they could say, like, on my team, they could go, oh, we have these roles covered. We have those roles covered. Now we can say we have these accolades, and therefore that means something. At the new firm, it was like, we have a bunch of the alphabet soup tagged onto the names. If you're interested in this, how about you figure out why you're really interested in this, how it actually helps our clients in some genuine way, and then take that into the firm strategy. Because we're less concerned with the letters after your name. We're more concerned with the delivery of value to the people that we serve. Maybe you can help us do this differently. Maybe you can't, but maybe you can. And if you can, here's a shot to actually create value, not just get the letters. That's the energy difference of the place I was in before and the place I'm in now. It's a throw out the playbook on the way it's supposed to be or the way it ought to be. You figure out what you think the playbook is that creates the most value and why, and then let's go test it against the world together. That's a very different type of relationship.
For you, Matt, I'm intrigued on a personal level. Like, for you to have kind of almost sounding deliberately like you've targeted these three areas to really challenge or move or explore life in a different way. What has that been like to experience just a level of connection across these three facets, if you want to say, of connection? And what do you sense it's done to you as a human?
So I'm going to give one that I just experienced literally like a week ago from when we're recording this. This was New Year's Eve. So my wife and I get invited to a New Year's Eve party that we've been to some other parties. It's in this weird way of we know all the same people, but we didn't know each other all those years ago. Like we're both invited to the same party. We'd be invited separately if we were in the area, but now here we are and we're going together. And uh, the woman who like hosts the party, like her and her brother are very close friends, and we're in this room. It's not a huge party, but it's a gathering of people that we grew up with. And when I tell you that this party felt closer to church than anything I've experienced as church in my adult life, that's what it felt like. Because over the course of an evening, we were able to talk about people who aren't there anymore, talk about people who have gone through stuff and who's still talking to this guy, who's not. Is he okay after this horrible thing happened to him? Well, here's what somebody knows. Here's what somebody else knows. It was like this council meeting or this church or this combined. It wasn't a therapy session. Like it didn't go there. We were having fun. Everybody was hanging out, but it was like, this person's has got this crazy idea. Let's talk about if this group is going to solve this idea in the new year. Crazy idea being like a NCAA bracketed style pizza competition for local, like stupid stuff. Stuff like, oh my God, how many of us
Problems that the world really
problems
need to be
problems of the
solved.
world, problems like how many of us around this table were in this room the night that this crazy guy that nobody's friends with anymore showed up at this show at this old venue in town and brought a gun. And this is like in the pre-Columbine era or whatever else, but then lost the gun. And the guy in the band who was on stage playing at the time was like, someone lost something. We can't say what it is, but if you find it, you'll know. And like half the room can't believe this ever happened. And the other half is like, oh yeah, I was there. Like I was there. I remember thinking like, I'm not going to be able to go back out to stuff like this if this goes down poorly. But I remember being there in that room and we're sharing the memory of being in that room. Another one where it's like, I didn't know. We're all trying to figure out. Google can't tell us when this hot dog place / arcade closed. So it's a mystery. And now we're trying to solve it. And now we're getting stories from around the table of everybody who worked there at different periods. And one of the guys is like, oh my God, I worked there and I heard the craziest story about this guy who got handcuffed to his girlfriend. And then you find out the guy who got handcuffed to his girlfriend's on the other side of the room. He's like, that was me. That sense of community is, so that's bigger than my family, but it's not my work. I'm not there for any purpose. The amount of joy that night brought, the amount of stuff that I'm still spinning in my brain that I'm like, I got to text this guy about that. I got to go see this person. I got to go see her in her one person show that she's doing at the local theater. I got to figure out how we're going to put this other idea together and see if this person can help me with some graphics on this and that person can help me with some writing on that. I need the restaurant recommendation from that guy because that sounded really crazy. That sense of community in my life will shape a huge part of the next part of my year. And likewise, my wife and I left that and we were like, you know what? We need to plan this trip together. We need to plan this thing together. Our little smaller unity experiences that we have in our portion of this. And then likewise, it ties back to work too. Like there are things, there's people in that room. I was like, should we ever hire this person to help with that? Next time we sponsor that, you think we could get them involved too? Like, what are the connections that these all make? And I can so clearly see how each of those facets of culture in my life now intermingle, wrap amongst each other, and what the bridges are that cross them. And it feels so much better than anything I can remember experiencing in my adult experience. It's ridiculous.
I just love listening to this. I've shared with you before when we've talked about how, even simply coming to Berlin and saying like hello to everyone in my neighborhood has had a profound impact on me, and some of the relationships that have formed from that just seemingly kind of innocuous point of connection. And just hearing another human talk about it that's intentionally kind of cultivated something to have such a like when you're talking about what a profound effect this has on your life, like I feel that so strongly, and it resonates so much. I have a few other questions in my mind that have come from it though, Matt. And one is, what would you have perceived this to be even possible when you were sat in that room with the therapist?
No, this seemed like the type of thing you read about in a book or you see in a movie. It did not seem like, is this real life? Is this just fantasy? That's what this seemed like. This is not possible. This is not reality. It's a myth that I've been told exists and that apparently somebody else has figured out, but is a great mystery. And it will only be from the successful and smart people at work or in other societally successful places that I will figure this thing out. But as of that moment, I was fully excluded from that with no expectation that I was ever going to get there. And I will go so far as to say part of what landed me in the therapist seat was like the willingness of just being like, all right, so if this doesn't exist, then do I just throw in the towel on all of it?
Yeah. You know, during the course of this, and even when you asked me the question initially, do I have another layer to tack on to this, family, community, and work aspect of connection? Just because you've mentioned in so many different ways, and even revealing that Noah may have been Irish after all, um, I'm really, really curious to know, where does a sense of something bigger than all of it, or whether that's God or whatever term that you'd define something with, be?
So I don't think you have to concern yourself if there's anything bigger than all of it. I just think you accept that bigger is there, but it's too big to grasp, and smaller, smaller than all of it is the part where the focus actually belongs. You can't, you can get lost in the bigger. There's always another corner to explore in the bigger, but you can get raptured by the smaller, about sitting around that table at the New Year's Eve party, with my wife, with a bunch of friends, not best friends, not people I'm going to see every single day or talk to constantly. They're not part of that really, really tight inner circle that I have. But these are like acquaintances in the world, and we commune like it's church when we share those stories. And there's something really, really special in the smallness of allowing for those moments to happen with others. And then instead of trying to get lost in the big, never ending expanse of what everything the future holds and what the possibilities are, and that's fine. There's a time and a place for that. But man, just trying to be smaller more often in each of those and take it back to those core principles of what are we doing and what are we making? And we might just be making an experience and nothing else. So make it a good one, make it a small one. It doesn't have to be grand or elaborate. You can laugh until your abs hurt for days in those small experiences. You're not going to find that in the big stuff.
I think it's a fairly fitting time to ask you, Matt. What is a good life for you?
It's those three areas. Let me keep figuring out how to make those three areas show up. Let me figure out how to, keep my wife happy, God willing, her to keep me happy, which we'll do because it's complete. That's the great part about marrying a best friend. It's like, what do you want to do tonight? Yeah, the pizza place that we always go to, the bar we always sit at, the bartender is always there, who knows what we order right when we sit down, and we're gonna watch a game show or a football game or a baseball game or whatever together, watch the locals come in and out, and we're just gonna laugh and talk about whatever with each other for another Tuesday night or whatever it may be, and come home and hang out with the dogs on the couch and do that kind of stuff. Like that layer is there. It just keeps on giving the more I invest in it. The same with like work. I want to be able to transfer my time for resources, but I will continuously figure out with work, like what do I say no to and what do I exclude from that? Because the whole goal of this work thing is to basically keep having it being a meaning and resource making vehicle to the extent that you need it to make resources. But at some point, if it just creates meaning, that's okay too. That's a end goal that I'd like to get to or work towards at some point, and what that transaction looks like. And then with community, I I could not be happier being back in the place that we ran away from all those years ago. And I could not be happier because of all the shared historical elements that we have that bleeds over in and across our lives, even if it's a crazy story about a hot dog shop that had an arcade that closed an indeterminate amount of time ago. Those shared experiences are unique. You can't make those up or invent those elsewhere. Doesn't mean we're not going to travel, we're not going to see other things, we're not going to try other things, do other things, be in other places. But this anchoring in, if my family life is right, if my work life is right, if my community life is right, if all those are good cultures and I don't ever let any of those turn into bad cultures again, it's as small as that, my friend. It is truly as small as that.
Matt, you've just put a big smile on my face for a large part of this. So I just must thank you for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. There's so much in what you're sharing that resonates so deeply and just, I don't know, makes me very optimistic about humanity.
I feel much more optimistic about humanity talking to you about this stuff today. You helped pull a few things out of the recesses of my brain that I hadn't connected before. Advance apologies to my wife that we're watching Cool Hand Luke again. At least I am by myself while you do something else. But this is why I was very excited when you said to do this. I was like, Mark will inevitably take me to therapy and pull a bunch of stuff out of my head because he won't let me wriggle out from under his cursed little Irish thumb. That's a compliment, by